What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have yet another album review for you. So, alright, this one, I guess it kind of goes with a bit of a theme here lately. I've been going over some deathcore albums here lately. So I looked over the release schedule and I saw that this album was coming out, and I figured why not give deathcore another run. So today I am going to go over the latest offering from Chelsea Grin, Suffer in Hell. So this once again comes out on the 11th of November on 1 RPM Music. It's band formed in 2007 in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is their 6th album overall, and I believe part 1 of a 2-part album, which might explain some things on here. The second part of this album, Suffer in Heaven, is due out in March of next year. And this is one that I did used to listen to way back. I actually have their debut, Desolation of Eden. And this kind of came at a time when I was big into deathcore, and I was getting into all things like Whitechapel, Born of Osiris, name a deathcore band. I probably was getting into it. And honestly, I have not listened to anything since that debut, and I know that this band has had like a lot of turnover in terms of memberships. I know that their longtime vocalist Alex Kohler left in 2018 to work on his life, for substance abuse and so on. So they actually have picked up Tom Barber, formerly of Lorna Shore, on vocals. He was Lorna Shore's original vocalist that was replaced by the giant scumbag CJ McCready, who luckily was replaced himself because that dude is a giant piece of shit. And there are some comparisons, I guess, to be made to Lorna Shore. This band, I wouldn't call them symphonic deathcore, like in the sense that Lorna Shore has definitely embraced that. They do have some symphonic elements, some electronic elements, atmospheric elements, but I think this is just more straightforward deathcore, and it's brutal. I mean, that's kind of the baseline thing you want from deathcore. It is supposed to be heavy and just intense at all times. And while that's something I like in metal, especially like the more brutal extreme stuff, that is kind of like a one-note thing with deathcore. I think deathcore kind of just gets stuck on that and then kind of forgets to add like some additional spices and flares and melodies. Though I do think this band kind of gets out of that a little bit. Now this opens heavier in hell with Origin of Sin, and it pretty much does set the pace for a good chunk of this. Lots of syncopated breakdowns, giant fucking growls, which I do really like the vocals on here. There's a good amount of like high-low shifts. His vocal delivery, especially in the lows, has like more of an old school death metal feel in spots too. Like it's kind of raspy. It's not like the low, super fucking, deathcore pig gurgle. And the cadences are admittedly really fun, and they do mix in some genty riffs and some, cool melodies every now and then. But immediately I kind of have an issue with the production, and this is kind of an issue I have with modern deathcore. Man, these albums have become so hugely overproduced here lately. And that is sort of an issue I have with like modern deathcore in general, honestly, is that, man, these albums have become hugely overproduced over the years. Like, Lorna Shore's new one, Brand of Sacrifice, well, I think they're pretty decent, very overproduced. Even Enterprise Earth to some degree. Like, I'm listening to Through the Eyes of Dead's Malice, and I think that is an absolutely awesome deathcore album, and it doesn't try to spice in too much. A lot of this, they want to throw in like quite a bit of atmosphere. The opening track, Origin of Sin, has kind of a symphonic line to it, and the guitars and drums kind of follow along with it. It's very syncopated, but it doesn't come across as like evil. It kind of comes across as like maybe like spooky, like Disney spooky. Like at no point does this actually conjure up like a lot of unsettling atmosphere. It's more or less just like there's like a Halloween attraction playing in the background, and that is just sort of what the band is following. It isn't until the song Deathbed Companion that it actually starts to have like a little bit more sinister feel to it. And admittedly, that song has a lot of cool, fun riffs in it, and the atmosphere actually works with it. It kind of follows a more mid-tempo groove. It does bring in some blast for a little bit, and there's some really good, like, dark, sinister melodies on it. And there are some cool, like, nods to melodic death metal, like Forever Bloom, which features and a guest appearance from the late, great Trevor Strnad. Forever Trevor, we miss you. Unsurprisingly, kind of sounds like Black Dahlia Murder, though I will say that Tom Barber's delivery and Trevor's are very similar, so they kind of run into one another, so it's kind of hard to pick out where Trevor comes in and where Barber comes in. So I don't know, I feel like that was kind of like a missed opportunity there to really make, Trevor's appearance stand out, but the song is not too bad, and actually Morning Hymns really plays on that as well with some really cool melodic death metal riffs, which pivot pretty well back and forth between the giant syncopated breakdowns. It's actually more similar to like late 2000s deathcore, albeit with some extra atmosphere, and I would definitely still say some overproduction. I think the biggest standout for me on this album also kind of illustrates a problem with it. The song Flood Lungs has this amazing atmospheric break. Like, it has this very clean, really pretty melody that actually has like such an epic vibe to it, almost like epic sci-fi. And it builds really well into the breakdown that closes the song. It's honestly one of the best moments on here, and it's a melody that really stuck with me after listening to this multiple times. There's really cool synths that complement it, and again, I like how it doesn't just cut off and then go to a breakdown. It actually takes this melody and sort of builds it into the breakdown with some cool tremolo riffs. It's really fucking good. But here's the issue. This song is only about 3.5 minutes, and there's a sizable amount of build up to the beginning of the song, then we get into it, and then another dropout, and then we're building again. Now that's cool if you have a longer song. Unfortunately, I think this song spends too much time building and not enough time actually paying it off. And that payoff is so condensed because it's such a short song. And that is kind of an issue with this album. It's a really short album. This isn't even a half an hour long. There are EPs out there that I've gone over that are longer than this. And I feel like some of the cool ideas on here are kind of suffocated by the fact that everything is very condensed because this is a very short album. And it is condensed again with layers of production, lots of syncopated breakdowns, a lot of repeating, the same stuff kind of too often, and then occasionally flourishing some really cool ideas, or like a lead melody that's a little bit different, or even a solo, which I think one pops up on here. This unfortunately kind of gives this album a very by the numbers feel despite all the extra added gusto and atmosphere to it. It's kind of like what I said about Lorna Shore in terms of them having a checklist for deathcore. Like, you have to have the syncopated breakdowns. I don't think it'd be a deathcore release without it. You also have to have the occasional more like brutal death slams, which there are a couple, namely Crystal Casket has some really beefy slam riffs that are pretty fucking heavy, and even some gentler riffs that do pop up in here, like namely the isness, which I actually had to look up that word because I wasn't sure if it was made up or not. Turns out it is real, and apparently it means an all-encompassing energy that surrounds us and drives us to explore our limitless consciousness, which is kind of sad because that song seems like the consciousness was a little bit limited. Like, there are some cool melodeath riffs. There is a solo on it that I think is short but pretty tasteful, but it kind of does a lot of the same things that were already on here. So I don't know, I feel like if you're going to use a word like that, you should actually explore a little bit. It's even, again, a really short song. Like, it's about 3.5 minutes once again, which is kind of the standard length. I think only the first track on here is actually over 4 minutes. Honestly, I think maybe a little bit more was explored on Morning Hymn. They actually try some clean vocals in there, but the mix comes back to haunt them because they're so buried by all the additional layers. The guitar tracks, the growls, there's synths going on in the background, the drums are pretty loud in this mix too. And I get it, it's probably difficult to mix all this with all these different layers to actually get everything to shine. And you can hear them, but they're very faint in the background. And it kind of feels like they should be brought up to the forefront because this feels like it's trying to achieve like a big epic moment. And unfortunately, just because they're so subtle, it just feels like, well, all right, this is another pretty solid breakdown on a 26-minute and 34-second album of pretty much just breakdowns. And honestly, for an album this short, there really shouldn't be any filler, but there definitely is with the last track and the title track, Suffer in Hell, Suffer in Heaven. Now, I'm going to entertain the possibility that this is like a segue track into the next album. Like, the next album may open up with like the second part of this, because this is just a 2-minute breakdown, and that is it. Like, it has just a syncopated breakdown. I think they're repeating the song title, and then there is the big slowdown of the riff to get it down to halftime to make everyone go ape shit in the pit. You can see it from a fucking mile away, and then the song just kind of ends. Now again, I want to give this like a bit of a break because it might be a segue into the next album. This is supposed to be a 2-part one, but the fact that this comes at the end as like the big thing that caps off this album as just a 2-minute breakdown, it feels like a spare breakdown. Like, this was a breakdown meant for another song in here, but they couldn't find a way to squeeze it in, so they kind of just isolated it and then tracked a different vocal track on top of it, and like, all right, that's how we're ending it. And that will segue into Suffer in Heaven when that drops in March. To me, unfortunately, it just sounds like filler. It's just not really a big way to cap off an album. Maybe a good way to tease the next album, but in terms of making this like sound like a complete full album, no, it really doesn't do that. Now again, much like the Lorna Shore review, I don't think any of this is necessarily bad, but I do think a fair amount of it is kind of unremarkable. Like there's a good amount of stuff in here that just doesn't stand out because it goes the well very often. Like that deathcore well is full of fucking breakdowns, and I don't think it will ever run dry, but there are plenty of other wells in metal across the board that I think I would much rather go to. That and this being such a short album with not much room to breathe for some of the cooler ideas that I think are on here, kind of made this just like an unremarkable listen. So overall, I'm going to give this 2.5 stars. Again, I don't think it's necessarily terrible. I think there's some good ideas and the playing is still really good. It's just how it comes together. Now again, I know that there's a second part to this, and I'm kind of curious about that. I wonder how well the two albums kind of mesh together. It might give this a more complete listen, but I don't have that one. That doesn't come out until March, so I just have this one. And I do think there are some really good moments. I think Flood Lungs, again, has some really cool possibilities if they just extended out the song. And Deathbed Companion is a pretty fucking solid song. There's just a lot of stuff that I think I would dial back, like namely overproducing everything. Like not much of this sounds very natural once again, which is a complaint I had about Lorna Shore. We keep coming back to that band. But that is an issue, at least for me. Like I like more organic sounding music when it comes down to like death metal and by that extension, deathcore too. It certainly doesn't skip on being brutal and heavy and all of that, but it is kind of missing like a little bit of depth, and I feel like it was just sort of replaced with like just extra effects in there. Still, I urge you to check it out for yourself, form your own opinions. If you're a giant deathcore fan and you like bands like Enterprise Earth, Brand of Sacrifice, maybe even a little bit of Born of Osiris and early Whitechapel, I think you might find some stuff in here you really dig. Don't just take my word for it. I'm just an old crusty fuck that's trying to give something that he used to be into a chance again and getting some mixed results. But the important part will always be for you to check it out for yourself and form your own opinions. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there, our store is there. We are currently out of extra large shirts. We are eventually going to have to order some more. We will be introducing some new merch at some point. We just don't know when that is. We get busy around this time. I mean, holidays and all that crazy shit, but it'll eventually happen. Also, Jam and John will be making some announcements about Denver Death Fest at some point. I can't say anything because I don't know anything, but you will when he makes that video and I edit it and put it up and so on and so forth. And of course, thank you very much once again for liking, subscribing, following, all that stuff. It means the world to us. It is just fucking awesome. I know, the thank you part. I feel like I should have run out of shit to say at this point, but I feel like I am saying a lot of the same shit. But that same shit is still very valid. You guys fucking rule, and it's just amazing that we get to do this, and the fan response is still kind of bewildering. That alone keeps us driven to keep making killer content, that and the love of all things fucking metal pretty much, and yes, deathcore too. But yeah, this whole thing's awesome. Thank you all so much, and we will catch you later.